Why Socrates was critical of democracy. Introduction. In the annals of Western philosophy, few figures loom as large as the legendary Socrates. As one of the most influential thinkers in history, Socrates' profound and often controversial perspectives on the nature of government and political power continue to captivate scholars and laypeople alike. Despite living during the height of Athenian democracy, Socrates was deeply critical of this system of governance, identifying several key flaws and dangers that he believed threatened the well-being of the state and its citizens. Rooted in his broader philosophical worldview, Socrates' critiques of democracy reveal a deep distrust of the masses, a preference for rule by the wise, and a fundamental concern over the potential for the tyranny of the majority. In this video essay, we will delve into the intricacies of Socrates' critique of democracy, exploring how his philosophical ideas and perspectives shaped his critical stance towards this political system. By understanding the depth and nuance of Socrates' arguments, we can gain valuable insights into the enduring debates surrounding the strengths and weaknesses of democratic governance. Socrates' distrust of the masses. At the heart of Socrates' critique of democracy lay a profound distrust of the common people and their ability to make wise decisions for the state. Driven by his conviction that true knowledge and understanding could only be achieved through rigorous philosophical inquiry and the cultivation of wisdom, Socrates expressed disdain for the tyranny of the majority and the potential for the masses to be easily manipulated by demagogues and empty rhetoric. In Plato's dialogues, such as the Republic and the Apology, Socrates' skepticism of the masses is clearly evident. He believed that the common people, guided by their passions and lack of education, were incapable of making the well-informed decisions necessary for the proper governance of the polis. Socrates saw the Athenian democracy as a system that prioritized the whims of the crowd over the pursuit of true knowledge and virtue. This distrust of the masses is perhaps best exemplified in Socrates' own trial and execution, which he saw as a prime illustration of the dangers of majority rule. Condemned by the Athenian people for the perceived crimes of impiety and corrupting the youth, Socrates viewed his fate as a tragic consequence of the masses' tendency to succumb to prejudice, ignorance, and the manipulations of political opportunists. Preference for rule by the wise. In contrast to his skepticism of the masses, Socrates envisioned an alternative system of government that would be led not by the whims of the people, but by a ruling class of enlightened individuals possessing true knowledge and virtue. This concept, known as the philosopher king, is most famously described in Plato's Republic. According to Socrates, the ideal ruler would be a figure who combines philosophical wisdom with the authority to govern. These philosopher kings would be individuals who have dedicated themselves to the rigorous pursuit of knowledge, the cultivation of moral virtue, and the understanding of the fundamental principles of justice and good governance. Socrates' preference for rule by the wise stood in direct opposition to the democratic principles of Athens, which he saw as prioritizing the rule of the ignorant over the rule of the knowledgeable. He believed that only those who had attained a deep understanding of the nature of reality, the good, and the just could be trusted to make decisions that would truly benefit the state and its citizens. Socrates' alternative vision for an ideal system of government was rooted in his philosophical beliefs about the nature of knowledge, the role of reason in good governance, and the importance of moral virtue in political leadership. By rejecting the democratic principle of majority rule, Socrates sought to establish a system of government that would be guided by the wisdom and expertise of a select few, rather than the whims and passions of the masses. Concerns over the tyranny of the majority. Closely related to Socrates' distrust of the masses was his deep-seated concern over the tyranny of the majority, a phenomenon he believed to be inherent in democratic systems of government. Socrates feared that in a democracy, the majority could easily vote to oppress or harm the minority, a form of tyranny that he saw as no better than rule by a single despot. In Plato's Apology, Socrates expresses his worry that the masses could condemn an individual, like himself, to death based on their own prejudices and misunderstandings. This concern reflects Socrates' broader philosophical belief in the importance of justice and the protection of individual rights, which he saw as being at odds with the democratic tendency towards majority tyranny. Socrates believed that the tyranny of the majority was a fundamental flaw of democracy, as it allowed the ignorant and irrational masses to impose their will upon the minority, regardless of the merits of their decision. He saw this as a grave threat to the well-being of the state and its citizens, as it undermined the pursuit of true justice and the protection of individual liberties. Socrates' emphasis on the inherent flaws and limitations of human nature, especially when it came to collective decision-making, was a key factor in his concerns about the tyranny of the majority. He recognized that the masses, driven by their passions and prejudices, could easily make decisions that were harmful to the common good, and that this was a fundamental flaw of democratic systems of governance. Concerns over the tyranny of the majority. Closely related to Socrates' distrust of the masses was his deep-seated concern over the tyranny of the majority, a phenomenon he believed to be inherent in democratic systems of government. Socrates feared that in a democracy, the majority could easily vote to oppress or harm the minority, a form of tyranny that he saw as no better than rule by a single despot. In Plato's Apology, Socrates expresses his worry that the masses could condemn an individual, like himself, to death based on their own prejudices and misunderstandings. This concern reflects Socrates' broader philosophical belief in the importance of justice and the protection of individual rights, which he saw as being at odds with the democratic tendency towards majority tyranny. Socrates believed that the tyranny of the majority was a fundamental flaw of democracy, as it allowed the ignorant and irrational masses to impose their will upon the minority, regardless of the merits of their decision. He saw this as a grave threat to the well-being of the state and its citizens, as it undermined the pursuit of true justice and the protection of individual liberties. Socrates' emphasis on the inherent flaws and limitations of human nature, especially when it came to collective decision-making, was a key factor in his concerns about the tyranny of the majority. He recognized that the masses, driven by their passions and prejudices, could easily make decisions that were harmful to the common good, and that this was a fundamental flaw of democratic systems of governance. Socratic questioning and the critique of popular opinion. Socrates' famous method of questioning and challenging popular beliefs and opinions extended directly to his views on the shortcomings of democracy. Through his relentless pursuit of truth and his unwavering commitment to rigorous analysis, Socrates sought to expose the contradictions and inconsistencies in the political views of his fellow Athenians, undermining their confidence in the wisdom of popular opinion. Socratic dialogue, as it is often called, was a core aspect of Socrates' philosophical approach. By engaging in a process of questioning and probing, he aimed to challenge the assumptions and preconceptions that underpinned the common beliefs and attitudes of the Athenian people. This method was particularly relevant to Socrates' critique of democracy, as he believed that the uninformed opinions of the masses should not be the basis for important decisions regarding the governance of the state. Socrates' emphasis on the importance of knowledge, reason, and philosophical inquiry over the whims of the crowd was a fundamental aspect of his critique of Athenian democracy. He saw the democratic system as prioritizing the acceptance of popular opinion over the pursuit of truth, a tendency that he believed to be deeply problematic and dangerous. Through his Socratic questioning, Socrates sought to undermine the confidence of the Athenian people in their own political views, challenging them to engage in deeper reflection and critical thinking. This approach was inherently at odds with the democratic principle of majority rule, as Socrates believed that the decisions of the state should be guided by the pursuit of true knowledge and understanding, rather than the fluctuating opinions of the masses. Socrates' alternative vision, the philosopher king and civic virtue. In contrast to his critiques of democracy, Socrates' alternative vision for an ideal system of government, as outlined in Plato's Republic and other dialogues, centered on the concept of the philosopher king. This hypothetical ruler would possess both the wisdom of a philosopher and the authority to govern, embodying Socrates' belief that only those with a deep understanding of true knowledge, justice, and virtue should be entrusted with political power. For Socrates, the cultivation of civic virtue and moral character was the foundation for good governance, rather than the whims and passions of the masses. He believed that the ideal ruler would be an individual who had dedicated themselves to the pursuit of wisdom and the cultivation of moral excellence, rather than one who had been chosen by popular vote. Socrates' alternative vision for an ideal state, while admittedly utopian in nature, reflected his deep-seated philosophical beliefs about the importance of wisdom, knowledge, and virtue in the pursuit of a just and well-ordered society. By rejecting the democratic principle of majority rule, Socrates sought to establish a system of government that would be guided by the moral and intellectual elite, rather than the uninformed opinions of the common people. Socrates' emphasis on the philosopher king and the importance of civic virtue in political leadership stood in stark contrast to the democratic system of Athens, which he saw as prioritizing the will of the masses over the pursuit of moral excellence. This alternative vision, though idealistic, continues to shape philosophical and political discourse to this day, challenging the widely held assumption that democracy is the ideal form of government. Socrates' legacy and the enduring relevance. The lasting impact and influence of Socrates' critiques of democracy cannot be overstated. His ideas have been interpreted, debated, and applied by subsequent thinkers, from Plato and Aristotle to modern political theorists and philosophers, shaping the ongoing discourse surrounding the merits and limitations of democratic systems. Socrates' concerns about the dangers of majority rule and the importance of rule by the wise continue to resonate in discussions about the nature of good governance. His philosophical perspectives have influenced the development of alternative political models, such as aristocracy, oligarchy, and various forms of elite rule, as thinkers have grappled with the challenges posed by the tyranny of the majority and the potential for the masses to make ill-informed decisions. Despite the widespread assumption that democracy is the ideal form of government, Socrates' critiques serve as a thought-provoking challenge to this notion. His deep and nuanced arguments force us to confront the inherent flaws and limitations of democratic systems, highlighting the tension between the will of the people and the pursuit of true wisdom and justice. As we continue to grapple with the complex issues of political governance, Socrates' philosophical perspectives remain highly relevant. His critiques of democracy, rooted in his broader worldview and his unwavering commitment to the pursuit of truth, wisdom, and virtue, continue to shape our understanding of the nature of good governance and the role of the individual in the political sphere. Conclusion. In the end, Socrates' critiques of democracy reveal a profound skepticism of the masses and a preference for rule by the wise, rooted in his belief that true knowledge and virtue should be the foundation of good governance. His concerns over the tyranny of the majority and his philosophical approach of questioning and challenging popular opinion further illustrate his deep-seated reservations about the democratic system. While Socrates' alternative vision for an ideal state, centered on the concept of the philosopher king, may be considered utopian, his ideas continue to resonate and influence political philosophy to this day. Socrates' critiques force us to confront the inherent flaws and limitations of democratic systems, challenging us to consider alternative models of governance that prioritize wisdom, virtue, and the pursuit of truth over the whims of the masses. As we grapple with the ongoing debates surrounding the nature of good governance, Socrates' profound and nuanced perspectives remain essential reading for anyone seeking a deeper understanding of the complex issues at the heart of political philosophy. His critiques of democracy continue to shape our understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of this form of government, and his legacy as one of the most influential thinkers in Western history remains firmly intact.